may be seated. Well, it might not surprise you to hear that I've been thinking about the risks and benefits of deconstruction lately. There's a lot of it going on around here. If you entered from Calvary's back doors to the alley today, you probably noticed most of the interior walls in the south end of the first floor have been pounded into rubble and hauled away. Deconstruction can be unsettling for any number of reasons, the most troubling being that one of those walls might have been holding up the floor above it, and everything could have come tumbling down when it came out. But what's been uncovered, specifically in that southernmost building, has been a sturdy framework of concrete columns and floors, a method of construction not unlike what you might see exposed in crosstown concourse, even if ours is on a much smaller scale. What this means is that all those interior room partitions can come and go over the years as needs, ministries, and the general flow of life within the building shifts without compromising structural integrity. During deconstruction, we get an unobstructed view of what's been quietly holding up the structures all along. For at least a few decades now, deconstruction has been a popular word in some religious circles as well. It's probably been romanticized a bit. This would be a good time to point out that Calvary's deconstruction has been a careful and intentional process guided by architects and engineers and carried out by knowledgeable tradespeople. But sometimes the deconstruction of faith feels a little more like an earthquake, something no one would wish for or choose for themselves. And anyone who glibly celebrates the deconstruction of another person's faith probably hasn't ever lost trust in something or someone they were depending on to make sense of their life. Or if they have, it apparently made them cruel instead of kind. It's also true that within a loving community, one you know won't throw you out if you make a mistake or don't quite measure up. Faith can be tested and tried with a little more courage and a little more depth, because we sense that the whole house won't collapse if we do. And it's often through such testing that we learn what aspects of our faith can come and go with changing circumstances and what need to stay firmly in place to allow for the movement that growth and change and life in general necessitate. So one more quick story before we look over at our gospel for today. Recently, a friend asked me how I made the move from carpenter to priest. Now, obviously, you need to leave out almost everything that's ever happened to you if a story about your life is to be useful instead of an instrument of torture. So it's interesting to note what we decide to leave in, isn't it? In mine, I included the fact that in the year 2000, I lost my grandmother to Parkinson's at the age of 86. 6 weeks later, an uncle died suddenly of a cardiac event at age 50. And 6 weeks after that, a 22-year-old who'd worked on our construction crew while he was in college died in an automobile accident. There was much more to the story of moving from carpentry to seminary, but this string of losses mattered to my life and to Ardell's, and it wasn't too long after them that I entered the discernment process. Now, our son Alden was 4 years old that year, and he also knew and loved each of the people we'd just lost. So one night, as I was tucking him into bed, he said, "Dad, it's going to be a long time before you die, right?" I said, "Well, I don't know, buddy, but I think it'll be a long time." "And it's going to be a really long time before I die, right?" It's a question I didn't really care to think about right then, but I said, "Yeah, I hope it'll be a very long time before you do." And then, his bright little mind spinning in ways we can still recognize, he said, "But it probably won't seem like a long time to God, will it?" I didn't see that turn in the conversation coming. But somehow it occurred to me that he wasn't the first to suggest such a thing. And I said, "I think you might be right about that too." There's a psalm that says 1,000 years are like a day to God. Alden considered this biblical support for his theory for barely a beat before adding, I guess that's because God thinks faster than we do, right? I can't say I've heard a better explanation for how the God of eternity might experience us time-bound creatures before or since. But more than that, I could see in the guileless curiosity of a child that even then, faith without the space and courage to deconstruct a little, to test and to renovate, probably isn't a living faith at all. With apologies to St. James, perhaps faith without the occasional deconstruction is dead. Well, the lofty language of the Gospel of John seems nothing like the clear speech of a child, even one trying to make sense of life, death, and the mind of God. But in chapter 17, Jesus is praying for his friends from the midst of a deconstruction of their faith deeper than any of them could have imagined. To provide a little context, all the way back in chapter 13, at dinner the night before Good Friday, Jesus, you remember, washes their feet, tells Judas to go do what he's going to do, and gives his disciples a new commandment, that they're to love one another just as he's loved them. And he says that their love for each other is how other people will know who they are. Other people will notice them, I assume, because they want a love like that in their lives as well. And then Jesus just keeps talking. He keeps teaching them for 4 more chapters in the gospel, the last of which, chapter 17, is comprised entirely of his prayer for them. So sit for a moment in the depth of deconstruction that's underway. One of this little band of friends has headed off to betray the one who drew them together in the first place. And that one, Jesus, is about to die. Nothing will be the same in their lives after this night. Surely the strange language of John at least honors the strangeness, and even the way words themselves don't quite seem up to their task when life is most intense, when life is unbearably real. Jesus talks more about truth than love in this prayer. He prays that his friends be sanctified, that they be made holy, which is to be made whole, in God's truth, just as he has been. But remember that he began the night with that clear commandment to love. Friends, you and I live in a time in which crudeness and brashness and disregard for what anybody else thinks can be considered marks of truthfulness. We talk about brutal honesty, but I'm less and less convinced that a useful honesty is ever brutal. The truth can hurt us sometimes, but the hurt can't be its point. Not if it's Christian. Not if it's humane. So what should be the relationship between truth and love in our lives? There's a wedding homily of Rowan Williams I often give to couples preparing for marriage. He uses the old-fashioned image of the wedding veil as a metaphor for the work of marriage, which is the unveiling of more and more of who each person is over a lifetime to the other. What makes this unveiling possible? Truth and love in equal measure, he says. Because there can be no love without truth, he writes. Without clear vision, love is a business of projection and fantasy. And there can be no truth without love. Without trust and tenderness and courtesy, truth will vanish behind the walls of fear and pain. This isn't just a truth about marriage, of course. It's a truth about life. For all the mistakes and failures I'd already made in trying to love the 4-year-old boy I just told you about, I don't think he would have risked speculating about life and death and God so freely that night if he didn't think his bedside was a place made safe enough to wonder about these kind of things out loud. If he didn't believe at least enough love was present to hold whatever he might say. And so it is with all of us, always, right? When things get deconstructed, the world may tell us that harshness and brutality are all that remains, or are all that are real. It may also tell us that what will make us one is a common enemy or a shared hatred. But Jesus, even on the night before he was executed, said that these are destructive lies, and that we don't have to belong to any world that tells them. Jesus says that love is what makes space for the truth to emerge. Love and truth are twin pillars, we might even say, that hold things up so the walls we hide behind can finally come down. Only in truthfulness and love will we become one as Jesus and the God he still draws us to are one. As far as I can tell, there's no reason for the church to exist at all, other than to be a community of love in which the truth about ourselves and our world can still come forth, making us all a little more one in the process. And if the church as we know it in America is being deconstructed, as we've been told it is for years now, maybe we can take heart that our faith was never meant to be in structures or institutions themselves, even the ones in which we first met Jesus. These have endured deep and thorough renovations too many times to count over the centuries. What we're called to be is a living community that's still in the process of being made one by the truthful love Jesus showed us. And we risk being a little more truthful and a little more loving right here as this particular congregation, not ultimately for our own sakes even, but because a curious, truth-seeking love will always be looking out beyond itself as well, wondering what it looks like to love a stranger, a foreigner, even an enemy, wondering what it might mean to love someone who can't quite believe they're worthy of love or held by a love they can't yet sense or trust or maybe even imagine. We can weather more deconstruction than we know, friends. The exciting, carefully planned kind, and also the less welcome, more frightening forms that will find us if we're alive in this world for very long. Jesus promised we could not only weather them, but find abundant life through them if we live as one in the space only truth and love can make in our lives. Those two columns, holding up a shelter we really can depend upon and come alive in and invite all sorts of others into, just as Jesus has done for every single one of us.